But mate, how are you going?
Well, good, Jeffrey. Good to see you again.
Yeah, mate. So what have
I
you
haven't
been
been
up
in
to?
person for a long time though, but this will have to do.
I know. Well, this will have to do for a little while yet. But yeah, it's always good to see that you've coped well. But but I'm imagining that during this time, it will be good for you to get focused on getting things done, aren't you? I mean, being a writer and all, this is one of those situations where if you can uh, sort of lock down and be focused, I mean, there's nothing better to do anyway, right? You might as well get down to business.
Well, I was used to it anyway because I was working from home for a long
Mm.
time, so I was used to not being on the same schedule as most people who were going to work every morning. I used to quite envy them anyway. But when this thing has hit, yeah, I'm just continuing my life as normal. So I'm sort of writing a book, doing online courses, creating new ones, and stuff like that. So a lot of my work is very solo anyway. So
Oh, you've always been a bit ahead of the curve, in my opinion. So this is just one more thing, but but it hasn't. I mean, how do you feel about it all? Obviously, being sort of thrown into this situation. I don't know if you saw it coming or not. I know you were traveling just before this, weren't you?
I was in China, actually, northern China.
Mm.
So when it all kicked off and had to cut it all short and
Oh.
come back at a quite a large expense, so, because there was not many flights coming. Well, it was hard to get a seat on some of the flights coming out. So yeah, it was pretty frightening when it was first happening. Yeah, but it
Oh, I
was good
bet
to
it
get back
was.
in. Mm.
Yeah. So are you, so what do you, how do you feel about it all, in terms of what this could do to, I suppose, our health, the economy, and everything else that's going on around the world?
For me, I look very much more locally. Like I just look outside and all the students and all the kind of bustle that I used to see around here has all just dissipated, and I'm seeing this cafe or that cafe. Some of them sort of stayed open throughout. Some of them have stayed shut and then open up recently and then shut again. So I know that people are really struggling. It's hard. I'm one of those people who find it hard to celebrate as you know during this time. Online courses, which is the business I'm involved in, have been doing quite well. People have been stuck at home, so they need something to do. So it hasn't hit me in the same way that it's hit other people. Um, but it's really hard to feel happy about that because when you go and talk to the people in the cafeteria and find out, how much their rent is and how they're struggling, um, it's quite hard to bring that optimism into them, and it feels a bit. You feel a bit wrong about trying to sort of lighten it or try to make people feel better because it's hard for people in that kind of situation, uh,
Mm.
and so I just want to keep going there, giving them the money to keep going as much as a little bit that I can do. But there's a lot of people who I used to see who I don't see anymore. So that's pretty sad.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, I do find a bit of a refuge at my local coffee shop, which a mate of mine happens to own, which happens to be probably the best coffee around here, and he's actually done relatively well since COVID, as people stay, stay home, and realizing that a lot of the people around this area need good coffee, and
Yeah,
as they turn from a sit-down business to a takeaway business, they've actually got this constant stream, and I kind of take refuge there because I can see people are obviously missing that interaction with each other, and
yeah,
total strangers would just congregate and have a good yarn outside the shop.
yeah,
Um, but I think some part of me want to bring that optimism as well. I mean, similar to yourself, I've always said that everything will be back to normal by June, and it certainly looks that way based on what we've heard so far. I do think that this whole shutdown came quicker than anyone could have anticipated. But just as quickly as it shut down, I believe that it probably will come back as quickly, as well. I mean, it's not like there is it's not like there's a war that went on and destroyed things. We don't need to go through this whole period of rebuild. Really, we just need to get out there and essentially start to dream again. Really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, again, yeah, I don't know the time frame, and I don't know how to hazard a guess about that. But I do know that time, things come back because people want things to be good. So as depressed as you get during these times, it's aspirations in the end that build, I think, economies. So what we had before, we had because people wanted to have those things, which was based on what they desired. And for temporarily that's gone away, and my hope is that that it will come back, because that yearning still remains. As long as that yearning still remains, people will still create the things they want to create and become the type of people they want to become. That's my hope, anyway.
No, and I agree. I mean, I think that's a kind of it's probably the best way to look at it. I mean, what I remember you telling me once before that the economy is really a reflection of people's aspirations, right? And I think that's a good way to look at it, because there's certainly more than just the things which are it's just more than just the material stuff it's built on. I think people have to understand that it's about sentiments, it's about hopes, it's about dreams as much as it's about a car or a house or or anything physical that you can own.
Yeah, and no matter what the state of the economy, what you do in life is strive for the things that you care for, and that doesn't change. So you might have a different pathway and a different route to get to those things than you had before after a kind of crisis of this type. But the striving to get the things that you want in life, whether that's for yourself or for others, is what drives you to just keep living in the way that you live. So you just have to work with what you've got, right? So during this period, I thought, like, what are the things that I can do more of now that I couldn't do before? So part of it is about making the most of that situation. And I know for some people it is really difficult because they're in a much worse situation. So I'm not kind of judging that, but I'm just saying what I have found useful is to focus on that, as well as to reimagine the future in a way that might be different from what your assumptions told you before, because that's really all you can do, right? You've got to deal with the situation as it is and try to imagine a life for yourself that's going to appeal to you, and then keep striving for the things that you care for. That's not going to change. You just might have a different path to getting there.
Yep. And sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and I like to think of this as a as some sort of a creative destruction where you've got to replace in order to get something better. You kind of have to bury the old ways of doing things. Before you can have automobiles, you got to give up on horses, right? It's it's just another shock that allows us to reimagine the way we do things. And I do believe at the other end of all this, I do think that there will be innovations that will be permanent as a result of the shock that was caused by all of this. And I like to think that humans will flourish as a result of these innovations, and as a result of these things. One of the things I did notice is just the fact that we're now talking to each other and being able to see each other not in suits, and how we relate to each other. The other day I was just talking to a colleague. My little son came up and just wanted to cuddle, and I was able to just do that and not
Your
be
colleague or
sort of ashamed about sort of letting people into your life a bit more.
Yeah, exactly. And I miss the human communication. I really do like the direct human communication. And I just hope that comes back quickly, because it's kind of going to be strange at the beginning, because people have been so out of touch with each other on a personal level that I think we're all going to be a bit awkward when we meet up for a while, perhaps, right? Because you have to warm yourself up again and get back into the swing of just actually dealing with people, different people, a lot of different people. But I think you always got to look at remind yourself what you value during these kind of times, because there you go back and you going through this, you think, I really enjoyed people. I really enjoyed being around people, sitting with them in cafes and so on, right? And I think, yeah, if at the very least I've come to value a lot of things that I took for granted.
Mm. Oh, absolutely. Like that is what I miss, and I do believe that it will come back, and I think in some respects, we'll probably treasure it for what it's worth.
Yeah, and we can
Um,
value it more. Yeah,
but at the same time, I like the idea of being able to relate to each other in virtually in a much more authentic and informal way as well. So, potentially there'll be a lot less stigma around sort of seeing people in their, in their real settings. And one thing I really like is that stripping away of the facade. There's this need to appear, I suppose, in the traditional sense of professional, needing to appear professional. And as a result of that, I think what we find is a lot less sort of time wasting and effort wasting in terms of trying to create this perception that has very little bearing with the substance of what we're dealing with, right?
yeah,
So I like that. But and so in some respects, what that really means is that we just become better friends or we just have better, closer relationships that allows us to essentially work without the hindrances of that sort of formality.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think in some respects that probably makes us much more effective as people. In terms of what we're taking away is the friction on when we work together, right?
Yeah.
So that's one way.
Yeah.
Yeah, but speaking of which, what's been keeping you busy all this time then? Because I've noticed that you're going full speed ahead.
Well, yeah, I've been getting my website done, because that's something which if I've been putting a lot of things off, and because of my lifestyle, I've been able to kind of go for walks and stuff in the past, and then procrastinate a little bit about doing stuff. But here now, you're stuck in there, and you might as well get as much done as you can. So, and doing all the stuff that you really were putting off and didn't want to do, and developing my website was one of those things. So I finally got that published, and I've got a small team working with me, because I needed people on the tech side and just general finance side, and so I feel quite well supported right now, and we've published the latest version of the website, which I'm really happy about. The other thing is I've been writing my book, The Alchemy of Writing, which is which I've got a solid few chapters down at the moment, but I'm trying to get a publishing deal for that. I was wondering whether to self-publish or to get try and get a big publisher behind it, and I've gone for that because the distribution is going to be just much bigger.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I don't know enough about the book writing world to know how that's all changed. I mean, there used to be a time where it's important to keep your to keep that copyright, keep that control. But you're right. I think distribution is a big part of what determines that success, and and potentially how I suppose Amazon or Google in terms of how they distribute books and all that might have changed the whole market. But tell me a bit more about the website. So I know you've already sort of conquered the online courses through Udemy. So being one of the best writing courses online. What so in terms of the website, what is the I suppose what is the objective that you're trying to conquer through building an independent website?
Yeah, I mean, one thing was, at the moment, what I'm doing is I'm directing people to my online classes on Udemy. But the plan eventually is to own the customers myself, because at the moment I'm entirely dependent on third-party platforms to bring my money in. And I realized that although they're good because they have big platforms and they have massive reach, millions, tens of millions of people, LinkedIn, Udemy, these type of platforms. The problem is that I don't have direct access to the customer in terms of, you know, their email addresses or anything like that. And so for the long term, I thought it's better, and I've been wanting to do this for ages, but just better to own the customer, to give them information and have them on my newsletter or my email list. And then when I want produce products in future, you know, I can let those who want to know about that, know about that. And so it was just something I had been putting off, and something that I wanted to be able to sell, like my own courses myself, from my shop, as it were. And there's a lot of other courses which I want to build, which are more premium quality courses. And for that, I wanted to get used to the, you know, managing all the back end of that, because that's a lot of work, like marketing, emails, and all kinds of organizational stuff that goes on, payments. You know, I need to start getting familiar with that. Although I hate that kind of stuff, because that's the other thing that I'm like, you really find that there's sort of creatives who don't want to think about money, or, you know, manage money in a way, or organize email campaigns like that stuff really, you know, it just really depresses me. But then there are people who love that stuff, and then are wondering, like, how do you, like, I wouldn't want to create a course, or, you know, so it seems to fall neatly into these two sort of types. It's good. So I'm lucky. I've got people who are not interested in creating content, but they know the other stuff. They know the technology, and, you know, the other sort of back end stuff. So
well, that makes perfect sense. You're working together then, isn't it? Well, what's interesting, you know, and this just reminds me of our, you know, the times that you sort of sat with me and took me through this entire methodology, right? You know, so what you did was open my eyes to how you can, I suppose, bring a structure of something which I thought was a bit of a voodoo dark art, you know. So there was a time where I grew up, and I just kept telling myself, this is a story I told myself, in that I'm a numbers person. I'm analytical. I'm someone who's just going to be good at maths and never ever going to be able to get, you know, anywhere with writing in English, for example. You know, I love the fact that I can score 100 100 out of 100 in maths, but nobody ever scores 100 out of 100 in English, you know, and I hated that.
right.
And because of that, I think I've almost just given up on putting any extra effort into English, or even writing for that sake. And so up until I think I met you, that's when I realized that no, like there is a structure, you know, there is a method to the madness. And in fact, you know, once I understood that structure, you know, that is something that I can work on, and I can actually see a path. And what's amazing is just how quickly, you know, there is that 80-20 rule. You know, what you showed me was that, you know, just able to get me that quickly to get that 80%, rather than, you know, obviously it will take a lifetime to perfect. But what the structure itself is such a big part of what makes effective writing. That you know, sort of just get you there. So, you know, and again, you know, the principles I can just, you know, rattle off. I always remember simplicity, clarity, elegance, and evocativeness. Right? You can test me anytime, and I'll remember the four.
Yeah. And then you find it works for speaking as well, right? It's a communication formula. There's as well as for writing, it can apply to just when you're giving a public talk or anything like that too, right? Have you found that too?
Oh, absolutely. What I found was really effective is when I do have it written down. So if I was going to be speaking, I have it written down, and have the ability to go back and edit, and revise what I've actually captured. What I found is using the same methodology actually makes such a more impactful speech, you know, and which kind of makes me realize, you know, I heard once, you know, this must be a really good orator, but he said, you know, how long do I have to give a speech? If, you know, if I have 30 minutes, I can give it straight away. But if I've only got 5, then I need 2 weeks. And there is truth to that. You know, the ability to speak effectively requires you to sit down and actually really work it out. But, you know, understanding the methodology allows you to say something that normally will take you 30 minutes to say in 5, but that impact is just incredible.
Yeah, and the reason it works, I mean, the way I found out this formula was when I was an editor for the Wall Street Journal. I was like editing reporters' copy for a few years, and I had to train some people within the organization. So I was thinking, well, I know how to write pretty well, but I do it unconsciously. I just sort of, just do this, edit it. Like, what am I actually doing? So I had to dig deep into that process and find out what were the principles I was using to make something better. Was it just completely subjective? Was it just, the feel of the moment? Or was there something more scientific going on, if you like? And so then I began to just list down all the changes I would make. But they were just random changes. Like, so, okay, I changed that, I changed that, until I began to see a pattern in the changes. And then it sort of started to jump out at me that, wait, I did that because it made it more simple. So therefore it made it more punchy, right? So then I found that, there was a whole looking at this list, there was a whole bunch of things that I did to simplify writing to create that effect, to make it more punchy and more engaging. And then there was a whole bunch of other edits I did, which were all done because the writing wasn't clear enough. So they fell into that category. And then there was a whole bunch of edits that I did because the writing didn't flow well enough. And then there were a whole bunch of edits I did because the writing wasn't stimulating enough. It was boring. And then I couldn't find anything in that list that was outside of those four categories. And that's how I thought there's some sort of a formula here, because people often scoff at the idea that, writing being a creative pursuit, the idea that there could be any kind of formula for that is, a lot of people who are writers and creatives find that a difficult pill to swallow, because they don't want to think that it's something that could be, reduced to a formula, right? But where I kind of try and explain it to them in a way that's to show that it's not reductionist at all, because these are just principles for achieving a certain kind of impact with each of those four things. But how you apply those four things to your writing is a matter of art.
Agree. Yeah.
So I don't need to see how you do your rhythm, or how much rhythm. How you do your elegance, and how much elegance you might want to sacrifice for simplicity or for clarity or for whatever. I realize they're like ingredients that a chef might use, where you don't just chuck in everything, right, and hope for the best, but you balance it and say, for what I'm preparing, for the dish that I'm preparing right now, this much simplicity is good, this much clarity is good, this much elegance, this much evocative. And like that, you balance and blend the ingredients in a way that where you might be making compromises, but you're producing something based on your own idea of what is good. Right? And that's where the artistry comes in. So to me, it's like a science and an art together, or a craft, right?
And I think that's probably the key. See, the thing is, I still believe it is an art. Not to take away from the great writers out there, but what changed again for me is the ability to see that structure allows someone, rather than seeing it as witchcraft, I can, so it's actually a bridge, so that I can now see. Then I get that there's an artistic element of it, and over time, if I have another 20 years, I could probably perfect that. But at least I've got a bridge so that I know exactly where to start. So rather than it being an end in itself, it is what it is a starting point. And especially for the left-brained, for the analytical types, it's just the way we formulate and see the world. Seeing patterns is what we need to do in order for us to believe that there's an answer. I believe the people who are right-brained, this just makes sense. Yes, they are following a pattern, but their brain is wired to pick up these patterns in ways that the analytical types just aren't, unless it's obvious and stated, right? So what you've done is actually decoded an art form to a point where the elements of where there is structure is, I suppose, made obvious to the people who couldn't see that obvious structure, right? So there is still that element of art form that needs to be experienced and mastered, and some people may be blessed with that
Yeah.
skill that, I will probably never ever be able to achieve. But what I'm able to do is get much closer using the methodology, so that at least what I can do is to be an effective communicator if I have a good idea.
Right, exactly. And that was my experience even at the Wall Street Journal, where I was teaching some reporters and editors, where you could see that some people could be turned into competent writers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where they could understand those kind of principles and be competent and write well. But there were always going to be those kind of star writers who were just had this creative flair, which which most people don't have. And for those, learning this structure could enhance their ability to do it, because it would help them to understand the foundations of what they were working with, right? And enhance on so many levels what they've written already. But you're right. There are certain sort of people who want to just get the science of it, like you did. And that can improve your communication dramatically. But there are always going to be these sort of born writers, right? Yeah. Who just kind of stuff just comes out of them, which is, very beautiful and, magical.
Yep.
And for them, it's still a usful framework.
Oh, definitely. I mean, for them, they probably do it instinctively, but then to
That's
have
right.
that sort of confirmation that there is, they are definitely doing the right things helps. But what I like to sort of allude to is the universal appeal of the methodology. The fact that, a lot of people probably do have the same assumptions I had growing up, thinking that it is it is witchcraft. And I think that's probably the biggest impact.
Right. And
go on. Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I think any craft will seem like witchcraft if you don't know the principles on which it's founded, right? So you could go to you could go to a room and see it's just feels wonderful to be in this room and it's just beautiful, right? But you don't know why it's beautiful. But if you're an interior designer, you would look at, perhaps, I'm guessing, concepts, abstract concepts like space, light, object, color, and then you'd have some kind of awareness of how to turn those concepts and create beautiful rooms out of them. Or if you're a fashion designer and you're working with fit, fabric, texture, whatever, color, pattern, you have your own set of reference points for creating beautiful clothes as subjectively what you regard as beautiful. Right, but you're still working with the same fundamental principles. Or a musician, pitch, tone, whatever, rhythm, melody. Composer is working with abstract concepts as well. How they work with them and what they do with them is what defines the final beauty of the piece. Right. So it's not prescriptive. I'm not saying you have to make your writing as simple as possible all the time. Yep. Because if you go for just simplicity, you're going to lose some of the music of the writing. If you just cut down a sentence to its bare minimum number of words to express the idea, it might not, and you do that with every sentence, then the flow, the music of the writing might not be that good. So now you take that simple thing and you make it more elegant. You're adding the ingredient of elegance to it, based on your idea of how to make it beautiful. So it doesn't take away, knowing the science of it doesn't take away, for me, any of the creativity. That's involved in the
interestingly, I'll dig into that a little bit, because this was one of the first principles that I found sort of counterintuitive, right? Yeah. So when I first started thinking of the concept of simplicity, that's something that I think a lot of people find counterintuitive, because they think that good writing requires big words, for example, requires fancy words, long sentences, and all of that. Yeah. Now, how did you come to the conclusion that simplicity has more impact on the audience? I mean, this is the key, right? Yeah. For me, it took a while to accept that bigger words aren't necessarily better. Mm.
Right, right.
Mm.
And it was a rude awakening for me as a journalist. It's really because I was trained in that sort of academic style as well. And now I would go back, if I looked at my own academic writing from university, I'd probably be horrified, because I would see that so much unnecessary, pretentious stuff going on in my case. The way I found out was because when I became a journalist, and I thought I was already a good writer because of my grades at uni. And then when I would send out, and I think many sort of, graduates have the same, suffered the same thing, which is they send an article to an editor thinking, well, I got good marks for my college essays. And then it comes back like completely changed. The editor has just changed it completely and ripped off paragraphs, that you spent hours poring over, moved the paragraphs around, cut lots of formal words out and all kinds of stuff. And they send it back to you for a back read, just to make sure that you're okay with it, which is like the custom. And then you look back and you go, this is not what I wrote at all, right? So it was like that.
Yep.
And then you go, and then your pride is hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so you're kind of like going, oh, then you try and explain it in terms of that person's just, subjectively just made a bunch of changes. But then I looked at it honestly, and I looked back, read it again and again and again. And so actually it's so much better than how I had written it. And so instead of getting, annoyed about that, as some reporters do, because they hate their work being, tampered with, because they think it's great, perfect anyway, right? And then I just thought, but look how beautifully it reads. Look how all the ideas just dance into your head,
Yeah.
How do you do that? And that was how my journey started, was ever since then, when I first sort of became a journalist. And I accepted that these people know how to communicate in ways which are many times more beautiful than I knew.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so the idea of simplicity came up early on in my education, because I realized that they would just make the words very familiar words, not unnecessarily pretentious ones, right? So, and you're right. It's like at first you think, oh, that goes against the grain of everything you're taught about how to write intelligently. But it's actually more sophisticated to turn those kind of ideas into the simplest form.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like when you do like a quadratic equation, which I can't do, but let's say you do a quadratic equation, you just ask to simplify. I remember in maths books, they simplify this.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes quite a lot of sophistication to simplify things.
Mm.
And in the same way, I think, with writing, you like a lot of people will struggle to simplify something, but once you do and you get it to that kind of simplest form,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes more punchy and engaging. Mm-hmm. And as long as you're not dumbing down the idea, and that's the other mistake that people make. They think that because you're simplifying it, you're dumbing it down, and you're taking away the
It's actually the opposite, isn't it? It is opposite. It's because the sophistication that's in the simplicity, and I know that that's actually a quote from Steve Jobs. The iPhone can only have one button, and knowing what that button does in what context is the sophistication of your insight into what the user's expectation, what the user's instinct is. And because because they understand that they can create something which is simple and intuitive.
Yes.
And that principle flows to language as well. It is because we understand the mindset, the perspective, the thinking, and the emotions of our readers, so we can use the most simple way to get that message across in the most simple words. Now, and again, so I'm actually interested in how you came to that awakening. So, because for me, surprisingly, it was the feedback from my peers that made me realize that simplicity was the way to go. When I wrote something which I thought would have been less intelligent, whereas the impact was clearly
that's right,
much more. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because as I tell my students, aim to communicate, not to impress. That's the first thing you got to get to, because you're not, why waste someone's time with you trying to impress them, right? You're trying to communicate something, so you should do that in the most effective way possible.
Yeah.
right? And when you simplify the writing, that means you take away unnecessary complexity. That's where the sophistication comes in. And then you ask yourself, like, why would I use a long, pretentious word when I could use a straightforward, simple word? And this is something George Orwell, said a long time ago. He's famous for making this point. And then you have to say, well, okay, so what am I really trying to say with that pretentious word? And that's where you have to think, really, all I'm trying to say is this. I just dressed it up unnecessarily. Now, don't get me wrong, there are times when long, words which are fancier or formal or official, they have their place, right? In the sense that you might want to give a certain tone to the writing, or it might be really precise and expresses your thought more precisely than the simple version of the word. So they're not exactly always interchangeable, but where they are interchangeable and it doesn't matter, I always default to the simple because it's just much easier. It flies into the consciousness of the reader without any friction or any kind of resistance. And in terms of the way that people comprehend your ideas, it's so smooth. So that's the impact that it has. Because when you're reading something which is not unduly complicated, you don't have to stop at all. You just get it.
That's right.
And so that's the baseline. That's the default position. Now, then you look at it and say, well, actually, this is oversimplified. I'm not trying to say show, but I'm trying to say demonstrate, right? And I really mean demonstrate, or I'm saying use, but I really mean deploy. And for that, in that context, the word deploy is just perfect. So you add it in like that, right? But you don't just say, I'm going to say utilize instead of use, simply because I think it sounds a bit posher, because we usually actually really dull word, utilize.
I can't think of an instance where I'd use utilize, because it's not exactly a precise word either, is it? I mean,
I'm thinking,
there isn't a precise meaning of utilize that you can't actually use in a simple word use.
Well, I've thought about that myself, and I came to the conclusion that utilize is more like to make use of.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Subtle distinction between use and make use of. If you really, there are some contexts where you might, but that's the kind of thinking you want to do around this, right? And that's like a good journalist will or a good editor will think like this. Do we need to say utilize here when we could say use? You just mean use. Use will just fly in, right? But maybe there's it. And again, these are where you balance the ingredients. It's more clear to say utilize. It's more. It gets the point across more accurately. Or, why would you say buy why would you say acquire rather than buy, or purchase rather than buy? But in some sentences, I would generally default to buy. But let's say you said buy many times in that piece of writing, and it's just got really boring. It's like repetitive, buy. Then you might do it because it's just too repetitive. Or you might do it because the word acquire has a better music to it than buy in that particular sentence or within the whole structure of the. So really you're getting into very detailed thinking, and just like a designer of a room or a designer of clothes, what distinguishes high quality clothing is the attention to detail.
Oh, absolutely. But I think this is where you're getting into a whole different set, right? So, and I remember this is the principle where you simplify, but then you add complexity only if it serves to evoke an emotion. So take that example of acquire.
Yes.
You'll probably want to use the word acquire instead of buy when you're trying to evoke certain emotion associated with acquire.
You could do it for any of the other three ingredients. So you could do it there. You're talking about evocativeness. So you might use acquire for evocativeness. You might use acquire for elegance, because the flow of that sentence, buy was two, one syllable, right? It's two syllables. It gives a different feeling to the sentence. So there could be an elegance reason why you do it. Then there could be a clarity reason why you do it, because acquire is more precise than buy, because you could acquire something and not buy it.
Oh, that's true. There you go. Yeah.
Right? So, but in most contexts, they're interchangeable. So you default to the buy because it's just the one that flies in quickest. So each ingredient has its own aspect of beauty, is what I call it. So, you know, each one, it's the simplicity, there's a beauty to that. Clarity, there's a beauty to that. Elegance, there's a beauty to that. Evocativeness, there's a beauty to it. Now, and so you can see the impact, all the different ways you can affect these four qualities, the different things you can do to move the dial on each of those four qualities, or to optimize each of those qualities. And but once you know how to do all this, it doesn't mean you do all of them. Now you're the artist.
Yep.
And now, so you look at, when I look at a piece of writing, like even a cover letter or any piece of writing, it's like a painting, right? So I approach it like, I know what I've got to work with. I know the ingredients I've got to work with. Or it's like a dish, as I said. It's like, I know what I've got to work with, the ingredients that I have, or the colors that I have to use. And now I'll apply the brushstrokes in the way that creates something most beautiful for me right now. That's how I approach it, because it can change tomorrow.
Yeah, no, definitely. But you see, this is why I love the methodology, because what it does is it gives you this massive sort of ramp up, the 80-20. You can learn to be an effective communicator very quickly, but it will take that last 20% will take a lifetime to master. And this is why it's not just, obviously there's still a massive difference between, from being an effective communicator to, an artist, to a maestro. And I know we can go on all day about that little difference, but what I like is that ramp up, to go from, someone who just, uses big words for no apparent reason, to someone who can really succinctly and clearly and impactfully communicate an idea. And I think this is probably where, in fact, most of us, that's all we really need, where we're talking about practical business English. I see a lot of emails, and in fact, this is a lot of emails I read. I find that it's overly complex for no good reason, and it loses its impact. And in fact, it actually bugs me now whenever I see something that's overly complex.
Right.
Whenever I see words that requires brain power to process, I switch off, because you realize that and I don't know, it invokes actually a pretty negative emotion when you see things which are overly complex. Either that they're wanky, or they're trying to obscure the truth, or they're trying to just stop you from reading it. But whatever it is, it's not going to have the impact that it's intended.
No.
And
you're
that's
right. That's a really, really good analysis of it, and you're spot on. I mean, from my 20 years or 20, 30 years of of writing, that's exactly the conclusion I came to as well. And it is that big struggle of that first step of saying, yes, don't write to impress, but write to communicate. And you're saying when you did that in your scenario, you got the feedback you got was far better, and you noticed the reaction instantly. Now, not everyone who read that understands what you did. They're differently, because unless they've thought about it and been doing a lot of writing themselves or editing, they wouldn't know, right? But hey, I enjoyed reading that, because you didn't give them all these obstacles to go through. Like I said, the processing power, I like that. It doesn't require processing power to read something that's simple. But does that make you less intelligent or less sophisticated? No, not at all. In fact, you have gone to the trouble, because often when you try to write things down, you come up with all kinds of vague, fuzzy, long words, which are not exactly right and are overdone anyway. So going through that and editing it out and saying, no, all I'm really trying to say here is this. So I don't need to have any unnecessary ceremony about it, or, grandstanding, when I can just say, all I mean is this. And by using this simple word, I haven't in any way diminished the importance or power of my point.
No, and in fact, it helps, because, and me, I'm pretty passionate about certain ideas, especially when it comes to politics. And some of those ideas are complex in nature, right? And it's already hard enough trying to communicate these ideas without having to waste extra processing power of, people dealing with the structure and the words and all these other complexities that you add to it. So in fact, the best way to communicate a complex idea is to use the most simple language that you can. and to give that clarity so that the people who read it don't need any more. And in fact, what you do by making it simple and clear is to allow the widest possible audience to appreciate something that they would not otherwise be able to appreciate if you were to use a conventional method of communicating it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And then when you add the layers of elegance and evocativeness on top of those, so you got the simple, clear. Clear is probably the foundation, because if it's not clear, there's no point trying to dress it up in other ways.
Yeah, that's right.
But even clarity can be compromised a little bit for the sake. I was saying very rare instances, but that's going. That's another discussion.
That's the mastery.
Yeah, but once you get to the elegance layer, okay, then you're looking at two things: the way the writing moves, which is the flow of it, like as music, right? Not poetic necessarily, but just a kind of a rhythm. So you have to have to become sensitive to that by reading stuff and looking at the rhythm of it. Like, it's a hard thing, like teaching someone how to dance, right? Intellectually, it's very hard to say this is how you keep dance to a rhythm. It's almost impossible to do that intellectually. You have to just say, show them, and look, tap your foot. So then you've got elegance, in terms of the way the writing moves, and elegance in terms of the way the ideas are arranged. So there's two kinds of elegance, and when you arrange these ideas in the most elegant order, so any piece of writing is going to go through ideas. And people talk about structure, so they say, well, there should be a structure, but I take it one step further and say there should be an elegant structure. Meaning you could have idea A, or block A, block B, block C. But what about if we put block C first? How would that flow into block A? Right.
But isn't that subjective in nature? I mean, the thing is, people organize ideas differently. Some people prefer a certain structure A, in this particular order. Other people organize ideas in a different order. And I think culturally speaking as well, how, depending on where you're brought up, there's a certain way that you join the dots and make those connections. Is that something that could be different depending on, who you're writing for?
There's two responses to that. One is, yes, people may disagree on the fringes, but you can see, you could say, because I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but you could imagine a document where like the two parts that follow each other don't flow at all, right? You can feel that, right? And almost anyone can feel that. Of course, on the fringes, someone will disagree with anything, right? But I'm saying most people would look at it and reasonably say, just doesn't flow that well. So of course, then you restructure it and you make it flow better. And then most people think, oh, that flows better. Most people will agree. Then on the fringe, on the kind of very subtle things, people might say, oh, I prefer this than this. But objectively speaking, to some degree, I think you can sort of say, yeah, this idea and this idea are like miles apart. And definitely one of the other ideas in there belongs closer to this idea. Now, should it be this one or this one? Maybe, maybe both could work, and so on. That's one response, I'd say. The second thing is, well, yeah, it's not about you trying to find an objective standard. It's about you trying to make it fit for your purpose, right? So if you're trying to persuade someone, to agree with you on your idea about politics, whatever that was, how well does this ordering serve that purpose versus this ordering, right? So you have your own basis for saying, well, I want to create this flow of ideas. So you begin to think about that and you begin to order it elegantly. But you wouldn't say, oh, it doesn't matter which order I put this. I could put it in random order, these ideas, and it will still be as good as if I put it in, some kind of order.
No, I mean, ideally, you want to take them on a journey, right? And usually it's the same journey that you've taken yourself to arrive at the conclusion that you have. No, you're right. Like I think, yeah, I think you've convinced me. It's pretty much an 80-20 in terms of, I think there's a big part of it is universal, and down to the fringes, it's a matter of taste.
Most
But
people will
yeah,
agree on yeah.
mm,
I think
yeah,
that's been my experience. Like people will read a good article that someone's edited at a newspaper, and
mm,
people will share it around. Wow, that was really good, and they'll share it among their colleagues.
mm,
And you go, it's happened to me. So like people will say, oh, that was really good, that was really good, and they give you a lot of good feedback. And then I think about what was really good about it, right?
mm,
And yeah, it was really nicely structured, meaning that it was seamless the way the ideas flowed into each other.
yep,
Right. Now, that doesn't mean there is only one structure. You could make it work by moving a different idea and doing it differently, as long as you make a good connection between it. But
mm,
then, it depends on the connection you can make, and how you execute that structure is important. And there are many different types of structure. A news article has a certain type of structure, and there's not just one way you can structure it, but you're following your own idea of what your purpose is, what are you trying to achieve, how effective does it do that, and your own idea of what beautiful is, as I said.
mm.
So
Yes, that's right.
sometimes you look at it and you say, that's beautiful. And there you're not in a kind of realm of scientific objectivity anyway.
Mm.
Now you're like, wow, this feels good. And that's part of what the experience of reading and writing is. So that's why I'm talking about the art and the science. There's a bit of both there. And with the art, it's very difficult to be prescriptive at all, because that's like, I say, this word feels good to me right now, and someone will say, it's not the right word. And then you might have a disagreement about it. We did as editors, like, yeah, we'd read something, oh, I would have done that differently, I would have used this word. But it tends to be on the fringes. There's a
Mm.
sort of common understanding of what flows well,
And
or
I think you captured it, right. So what's interesting is that there are the universal sort of principles that underlies, the what makes good effective communication, and that's what you tend to agree on. What
yeah,
you tend to disagree on is more on the artistic, subjective,
yes,
use of
yeah,
words, emotions, evocativeness. Like that's the artistry of it, and
that's
and
right. Yeah,
and that's something that now knowing that allows me to to just feel better that it is not witchcraft. It is something that there are, as long as you get the universal part agreed upon,
yeah,
then you're on the right track. At least you're on the same, you're playing
yeah,
the same game basically.
yeah,
And that allows me to effectively feel comfortable that regardless of how much so artistry you can still have a ticket to the game. But yeah, so that that
don't
is
think
what.
you. I mean, you could also develop the artistic sensibility as well, because
Mm,
um, I'm sure you have artistic sensibility in some things in life, right?
mm,
That means you have an artistic sensibility, and it's just a case of now applying that to this, to really begin to wonder about when a piece of writing is beautiful and why.
mm,
When it feels good in a kind of a level which is not intellectually, you know, uh, understandable, but which just feels right to you. I often work with that. Like I would be editing stories for the Wall Street Journal, and I would be going, I don't even know why I'm making that change, but something about it feels good to me. Something about that word feels good to me. I probably couldn't explain to you why,
mm.
and I've tried, and I can't explain to you why, but I just like that, right? I like this word better than
This
that
feels
word.
right. Yeah.
It just feels right. And
Mhm.
and then it's a case of, are you willing to be comfortable with that? And are you willing to go with that? Trust that. So you're getting into mystical realms there, right? So
Yeah.
I'm saying
So.
the whole process is,
Mhm,
you can start at the science. So some basic
mhm,
rules, right? Let's say, look, you need to do, it's like grammar. Like grammar has basic rules which are there to make things clear,
mm,
right? And also sometimes to make things elegant too, I think.
yep.
But then there are reasons why you might break a grammar rule, right? As a sort of a writer,
Yep.
you say, but you know the rule, but you just say, yeah, but start a sentence. Those days, people didn't start sentences with but or and or whatever, but newspapers do that all the time. So these things have changed over time as well. Certain rules, then certain rules become fashionable.
Hmm.
You know, like hyphens used to be all over the place, right? Whenever you're kind of, I don't even know. I mean, I write by ear mainly, not by kind of grammar rules anyway. But you know, you get this kind of ways where a certain two words used to always be hyphenated, and then after a while, some people will just turn them into one word, and everyone thinks, "Oh, okay, that looks fine. That's good, actually. Didn't need that little eyesore of a anyway." So, and it's smoother. So, you know, and then if everyone likes it, then it becomes accepted, the convention.
Accepted, yeah. And language is a live thing, you know.
Yeah,
It's not something that doesn't change over time. So I think, and certainly I think the advent of the online culture completely changes that as well. So you know, I think in some respects we got to just understand that it's an art, it's an evolving art, it's something that's live, and you know, rather than trying to pursue like a perfection of sorts, you know,
right.
just understand that it
Yeah,
is art,
that's the
you
thing,
know.
right? I can
Yeah.
tell you, like, even me, I mean, I'm supposed to be an established writer. Like, I have many doubts about my use of grammar often. Like, you know, I'm not going to look up every single time that I have a minor grammar doubt. I know roughly what's good, and I know when something sounds good to me. But what I mean is, like, if you're a writer now and you're out there thinking, you know, oh, I need to, like, you know every single grammar rule out there. As I said, I learned my grammar through reading good pieces of writing, and I didn't actually study for grammar. But yeah, I became a news journalist for, you know, some pretty big newspapers and so on. I mean, maybe because we had sub editors as well who would look at, like, there were people who would look at those kind of things as well sometimes. But what I'm saying is, like, don't have to panic. As long as you, but at the same time, take it seriously. Like, do learn how to express sentences grammatically if you don't know or if you have doubts, because usually they will help your writing to, those rules will help your writing to become more clear and more elegant.
Absolutely.
So don't ignore those rules either.
Right. Well, every time I talk to you, I just feel like, you know, I'm always learning something new, always something to improve my quality of communication just that little bit. So I really appreciate it. And it's so obvious that you are passionate. You love this stuff. You live, you breathe it, you know, and it's something that you know, it's no, I mean, looking back now, I've realized that, you know, it's no accident that you've done so well with your writing courses, because, you know, this stuff is just so universal in its appeal and just got that utility, you know, that can help even people like myself who just isn't wired that way. So, you know, thank you very much for opening my eyes and sharing all that wisdom with me, because I can see the impact it has in my own life.
I can see
So, you know,
yeah.
appreciate that. And so, you know, just in terms of, you know, what do you think will happen now in terms of just life in general? So what's your outlook for the next 6 months?
What, for the world or for myself?
A bit of both, really.
Well, you know, it's such a strange time. Like, it's like walking out after, like, an apocalypse has happened, right? And you're just kind of going around and see what the damage is, what's left, who else is there. And so it's, on one level, as a writer and as an artist, as I sometimes see myself, it's actually really fascinating to walk outside and just see how much things have changed. So just from a kind of journalistic point of view, what's going on? Like, how are people going to change? How is communication going to change? And I don't know whether it will or not. I mean, I'm just like looking at it like with, like, a child, like, you know, wide-eyed wonder, and I'm curious, and that's the thing. I've always just been curious about everything that happens, and that's probably why I was a journalist. And so more, yeah, I'm not one for, like, predicting what's going to happen, but I'm curious, and at the same time I want to contribute whatever I can to making people feel easy about what it is, and trying to console, or to uplift, or to help people to reimagine their lives after this, and which is what I was doing mentoring and things like that beforehand. And I think that's still the role that I want to play, which is to say, you know, if anyone is feeling like, oh, they don't know what to do or lost about, direction, then, you know, I'll do whatever I can to help them to see a bright future. Because I think that as long as your aspiration, as I said, is there, to strive for what you care for, and once you know what it is that you care for, then just striving for it, whatever the odds, and, you know, without having any guarantees, but knowing that this is what makes your life meaningful. It's just about setting people back on that path.
Oh, definitely, mate. And I think that's probably the more important thing than potentially all the material stuff that, you know, that's going on out there. And, you know, I've always believed that I think it's more important to focus on what's meaningful rather than what's expedient. And I think that's what gives us that satisfaction in life. It's not necessarily the wealth or the fame or the, you know, or you know, the status and power and all that sort of crap that we think we need. It's knowing that we serve a purpose, and it's knowing that we make a positive difference to those around us, and, you know, and beyond. I think that's ultimately what you know, makes us happy. So
yeah, and creating beautiful things. I mean, that's whether it's right now, whether it's like MasterChef and then trying to emulate the beautiful cooking that you see on there, or, you know, whatever. As long as you try to enrich the world with delightful things, pleasurable things, and useful things, that I think is the best focus for any kind of, especially for an entrepreneur, but you know, for anybody. So, you know, if you're focused on enriching the world or lives, it sounds a bit grand, maybe a bit pretentious, but, you know, that's sort of the way I see it, is that you focus on that, enriching, and then you create nice things that people then want to be a part of, or to have. And then and if we just focus on those kind of things, I think we can go a lot further than we think.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think you tapped on something pretty deeply embedded in, you know, in human psyche there. So, mate, always appreciate the insight, and thanks for taking your time. Good catching up with you, and I can't wait to grab a coffee with you in real life soon.
All right, let's hope. I mean, it should be quite soon, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Thanks for the conversation. Enjoy it.
Thank you.